Hi, BookTube. Welcome to another fiction review. I think this is going to be the first independent author that's appeared on Heather Reads, but it's not going to be the last. Independent books, they can go where other books cannot. They cover such a wide range. Yes, many of them aspire to the genre and style categories of commercially published fiction, but others, they're 100% marching to the beat of their own drum. And in between those two poles, there's much variation as well, and a greater variety of reasons for writing. And I also don't know why this is. Perhaps it's because you can know the author a little bit better. Independent authors, they don't make a lot of money, they're not celebrities, they're more like you and me. But perhaps that's the reason why I always find that when I'm reading an independently authored book, it feels more personal. It feels as though the writer is watching over my shoulder as I turn the pages. Today we're reviewing Feeding the Pigs by Thomas Richard Brown, published in 2024 by Second Child Limited. Can I pitch this novel? Well, this is a gentle, undemanding book. It's a bit of nostalgia for anyone who was coming of age in the 1960s and you grew up in a UK village or on a farm. For the rest of us, it's a bit of social history, but only a bit. Doesn't get too heavy. Feeding the Pigs is the author putting down his own story with some fictional embellishments. And it's the story of an interesting generation, a generation that were aware that their parents were young during the Second World War, which shaped their fate, and not always in a good way. Whereas for themselves, there's all these opportunities to look forward to, opportunities for education and for leisure. That might make it sound too serious, though. That's not the case, okay? The cast of characters includes a generous number of comic parts, and there is a cozy story of a robbery where the bad guys are routed by a penful of hungry pigs. Book details. How long is it? How did I get it? How much did it cost? The paperback copy of Feeding the Pigs is 314 pages long. However, there's 14-point font, there's a half-space gap between each line of text, and what I would call healthy margins, that is an inch wide on 3 of the 4 sides of each page. So it's designed for reading comfort, and for pages to go by quickly. The chapter length averages 13 pages each, but it's not going to feel like that. It's going to feel like less. The person who watches television has got to get the credit for bringing Feeding the Pigs to my attention. Through the local library, he learned about a talk being given by the author in Bedfordshire, not a long drive from here. And so he actually met Thomas Richard Brown and he got our copy signed, as you can see in this photograph. He paid full price, and I wish I could tell you how much that was, but unfortunately the person who watches television paid in cash, and he can't remember how much, and there's no recommended retail price on the back cover or anywhere. So Google had to come to my rescue. Paperback copies are sold on the Foyles and Waterstones websites in the UK for £12 each, but they retail on Amazon.com for US viewers for $13. The Kindle version is $3.50 in the US and £2.50 in the UK. What we know about the author. Thomas Richard Brown was born in 1943. He was a child of a farming family, and he grew up in the county of Huntingdonshire, which is now part of Cambridgeshire. He took a degree in agriculture from Y College London in 1966 before returning home to run the family farm. He didn't start writing until he retired in 2008, and he used the services of another independent author, Mary Matthews, who had started up a small publishing business to print and promote her novels. Now I'm quoting from the testimonials on the publisher's website, and it's Thomas Richard Brown himself, and he says, quote, "I first came across 3 Shires Publishing and its owner Mary Matthews when I answered an advertisement offering assistance to those with written work that they were unable for one reason or another to get published. I have found the assistance that Mary gave throughout the whole process invaluable." Now, Mary Matthews offers a number of workshops for aspiring writers who want to know the best way to prepare their texts to be published both virtually and in print. And she gives guidance also about online promotion. I'm going to leave a link to her company website in the description box. We got to talk about the setting in this novel. The setting is so important. Feeding the Pigs is set in rural Bedfordshire in the year 1963. I'll give everybody a little help here. First of all, we'll put up a map of England, and you can see that little ridge splodge. That's Bedfordshire, not a big county, but it was significantly placed because the second motorway ever, that is, big highway, to be built in the UK, the M1, if I show you this next map, the M1 cut a line through the most of England from north to south, and it ran straight through Bedfordshire. And it made London just a 30-minute car journey, or at least it was a 30-minute car journey in 1963. Okay, things have changed. Never mind. There were 3 large cities in the county, Bedford, Luton, and Dunstable, but even today, the majority of the area in that tiny county is rural. Feeding the Pigs, it never takes you to the cities, okay? In Brown's 1960s rural Bedfordshire, London is mentioned in ways which suggest exoticism, a place that's known about but not very much visited. And anybody who goes to London to study becomes different, becomes posh somehow. Not everyone in the book recognizes a London accent when they hear it. So this is a very fragile setting, effectively. It's the last years before big roads were built and cars became something that most people owned and needed to own. And the world then became bigger for most people than what it had been, which was usually just a very small radius around where they lived. And the setting also involves unusual weather. The winter of 1963, the Great Freeze, as it was called, from December 1962 until February 63, temperatures dropped across Europe, and it was one of the coldest winters on record. In my description box, you will find a link to one of those charming little BBC black and white archive videos that was made a year after the freeze as a retrospective, and it'll give you some idea of the conditions and the challenges. In the novel, Brown is going to focus on the particular difficulties that farmers had to deal with when their water supplies froze, when roads were treacherous, almost completely unusable, and vehicles, of course, ran on diesel fuel, which iced up inside the tanks of tractors and vans and other farm machinery. Okay, a word about the narration, viewpoint and voice and structure and language. The novel's written in third person, but there's no focused viewpoint. The narrator is mainly following one character called Peter Dunmore, but there's a certain distance that's retained. That is to say, what you as the reader will get are the character actions and dialogue. You'll get quick mentions of facial expressions or tone of voice, but we won't go into the character's thoughts or emotions or dreams. There won't be any internal commentary. And the effect of that distance, it's twofold. First of all, it keeps the book very light. The only thing the reader needs to keep straight is who are all these people and what did they do. We don't need to understand their inner depth, so to speak. And that lightness in turn makes the book comic. And Thomas Richard Brown is able to create comic characters. He doesn't maybe have the same linguistic flair as Dickens, but like Dickens, the characters who are meant to be a bit stupid or disobedient and awkward or even camp, they can be relied upon to do their thing every time they appear in a scene. And what I'm going to do now is read a passage from page 166, just to give you a sense of that very light, distanced narrative style. Okay, here we are. Page 166. When Pete got back to Meadowview, the back door was unlocked. He took his shoes off and tiptoed toward the stairs, meeting Joyce, who was coming down. Her hair was sticking up in all directions, and she pulled her dressing gown around her and tied it. "Come in here and shut the door," she whispered as she went into the kitchen. "Do you want a cup of tea?" She smiled and picked up the kettle. "I'm going to have one. I can't sleep." And she held the kettle under the tap and filled it. "I've got to be at work at 7. Pete looked at his watch, "and it's nearly 4 now." "Don't worry about that. You can do it at your age. I was young once," she said as she looked in the mirror. "Good God, look at my hair. What do I look like?" She held her hands to her face. "Well then," she said, looking at Pete. "Well, what?" "Do you want a cup of tea?" "All right then, but aren't we going to wake Freddie up?" No, not him. He were up the pub with PC 49 again. He won't wake till the alarm goes. Anyway, it's Sunday, so the alarm won't go. She filled the teapot and waited for it to brew. Tell me about the dance, then, Pete. Was it very posh? I suppose it was. Was there lots of lords and ladies and all the nobs then? She grabbed his hand and patted it. Come on, Pete. Well, I suppose there were some lords and ladies, but I don't know who they were. The ones I knew were farmers and horsey people. I knew some of them from home. And what was this girl like that you had to escort? Come on, tell me. She was very nice, but she didn't like dances. I know, Joyce grinned. Her mother was trying to marry her off. I bet that's what it was, and she, the girl, didn't like it. Am I right, Pete? She said it was like a cattle market. There, I told you so. Were you married off to her then? No, nothing like that. She's going to university, so she's a bit serious. And was she pretty? What did she wear? Was she a blonde? Well, she was just a nice person. But what did she wear? A dress. I don't remember much about it. Oh, typical. Just typical. You're nearly as bad as Freddie. Pete drank his tea and went to bed. So that was the extract. Now, the novel has additional unintentional comedy. I don't know if the author will be aware of this, but the narration would often build up expectation of a significant dramatic future event, but then the event would either, well, it would not happen, or it would end up much less significant than expected, or it would happen but take longer to happen than you expect, or happen without any descriptions of what would seem to be the most important aspects. And I cannot say more without spoiling the book, and I'm worried that people will see this as a criticism. But both myself and the person who watches television, we read this book through, and we agreed that whatever a commercial publisher might think of Thomas Richard Brown's approach to storytelling, we found this gift for the anticlimactic to be just as funny as the parts of the book that were intentionally comic, like the robbery. We enjoyed them, and they were the parts of the book that we both wanted to talk about the most when we discussed it together. Does this novel fit a genre label? Yeah, it's autobiographical fiction. Thomas Richard Brown is writing what he knows and what he lived. And reading it felt like getting to know the everyday aspects of life on a farm in the 1960s, the structure of those rural communities, the links between people, the social rituals. It was a less complex, less technological, less hectic life. And that brings me to what stands out about the book. It was an ideal read for me. You may or may not have noticed that I have been late with a couple of videos, which is circumstances beyond my control, laying claim to that time that I would normally put aside for filming and editing. Life got hectic, and the novel took me away from all of that. It didn't ask me to figure anything out. The book isn't plotted, although you could call the robbery a subplot if you wanted to. Stuff just happened, everyday stuff, and the characters handled it. I couldn't read fiction like Feeding the Pigs all the time, but I really recommend it for comfort reading for a frazzled brain. Is there problematic content in this book? How problematic this book will be is it's going to be an individual thing, very individual. The male characters, how can I put this diplomatically? They all have an observational fixation on the females, on what clothing they wear, and how snugly that clothing fits them in certain places. Okay? Some female characters also, they manage to wear high heels no matter how severe the weather, and they walk across icy surfaces without injuring themselves. I found that extremely amusing. There is one queer character who's written in full camp thespian stereotype. He doesn't appear till page 175, and he plays just a bit part, but he did make me kind of roll my eyes in the way that you do when you're thinking, wow, will this ever get old? But he's just one of a number of stereotypes, and they're all the kind of stock-in-trade characters that you would have got in comedy in the 1960s and 1970s. And I was able to forbear by considering all of them as part of a social history portrait, like a cultural time capsule. But nevertheless, some readers are going to lose enjoyment by encountering that many stereotypes, and they should make their reading decision accordingly. Okay, any suggestions for related or follow up reading? I'm going to recommend a work of nonfiction. What I was looking for was a history of British agriculture during the early 20th century, but I couldn't find anything aimed at a general audience or reasonably priced. And so that says to me, hey, there's a gap in the market. But what I did find was this: The Barn by Sally Coulthard, the lives, landscape, and lost ways of an old Yorkshire farm. And I'm going to quote the Amazon write-up. Across the fold yard from Sally Coulthard's North Yorkshire farmhouse stands an old stone barn. When she discovered a set of witches' marks on one of its internal walls, she began to wonder about the lives of the people who had once lived and worked there. Both the intimate story of a building and its hinterland and a wider social history, The Barn explores a hidden corner of rural Britain that has witnessed remarkable changes from the 18th century enclosures to the Second World War. The fortunes of the barn have been blown like a leaf in a gale by the unstoppable forces of new agriculture and industry. Seismic shifts in almost every area of society were all played out here in miniature against a backdrop of scattered limestone villages and the softly rolling Howardian hills. And that's another review done. The next video is going to be so much fun, because with only 3 books left to finish so that I can reach my target of 53 books for my Read What You Own challenge, I think it's time to analyze my reading statistics and share my goals for the next 12 months. The video is going to be called Read What You Own Challenge, The Home Stretch. Okay, so I'm getting excited for that. I see that there's a lot of Victober and spooky reading going on BookTube. Good luck with all that, and I'll be back again in a few days' time. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.